Barely 30 minutes, and we're across the windward path. So many days of sailing. We're above the lovely in the days of Napoleon. This white marble capital, palace of Haiti's president, is a glistening landmark. Just 5 brief hours as the airmail flies, and we're in this unique capital of a mystic land. Here are sights and sounds unmatched on the face of the globe. Here is a land where the eerie throbbing of native drums rolls down from the hills in the brilliant moonlight of a Haitian night. Here is the land where a slave once rose to be king, the great Christophe, one of the most colorful figures of all history. Most of the Haitians' waking hours are spent in the constant parade to market. For hours at a time, women tramp across the hills as much as 40 to 50 miles, bringing gourds, breadfruit, candles, bone buttons, jewelry, bright-colored calico, and even mail-order tea. Haitians carry on much of their industry and agriculture with startlingly primitive tools. Here, for instance, is a hand-driven lathe. And here is a trimmer that works on bed springs. It has been the same from father to son through the centuries. Yet aided by such primitive methods, Haiti sells $50 million worth of manufactures, hardwood, coffee, sugar, and other products to the world every year. The cutting of this hardwood log represents a full day's work for both men and the superintendent. Before this sawed through, a flying clipper ship will be halfway to the southern continent. In 5 brief hours from Miami, our giant clipper ship has spanned the 800 miles to Puerto, Haiti, and we're off for Santo Domingo, first of the white man's capitals in America, and the beginning of the Spanish Main. Beyond Port-au-Prince, we fly directly over the historic citadel of Haiti's Black King, Christophe, built on the very peak of a mountain. In less than 20 minutes, we've crossed all eastern Haiti, and beyond our window lie the chalk cliffs of Santo Domingo, which so often sheltered the brave sailing craft of Columbus. A few minutes more through a cooling tropic shower, and we're cruising by the ancient city of Santo Domingo itself, founded more than 4 centuries ago by Columbus. This is the river into which his ships of discovery sailed, and on whose banks he built the city destined to become the gateway to a new world. The tree to which Columbus tied his flagship still stands on the river bank. And here, in the heart of the city he founded, and which later refused him entrance and sent him back to Spain in disgrace, is the first cathedral ever built in the Americas. Within this old church, filled with priceless treasures, the cradle of America's history, lie the mortal remains of the great discoverer. These bells were among the many gifts of Ferdinand and Isabel, and many of the crowned heads of Europe, to Columbus and to this historic shrine. And here are the ruins of the castle of Diego Columbus, son of the discoverer, who lived to govern the city his father built. Leaving Santo Domingo, speeding on with the mail, we head over the famous Mona Passage for Puerto Rico. The cockpits of these great flying clipper ships are like the bridge of a liner. Pilot, co-pilot, radio operator, and flight mechanic occupy posts in this forward compartment. Then San Juan, Puerto Rico slips beneath, and we glide to a landing in the storied harbor just 8 hours from Miami. When Columbus landed on the west coast of this little island in 1493, he named it San Juan. A few years later, Ponce de Leon founded a city and named it Puerto Rico. Now the names are curiously transposed, and the name of the city is given to the island, and the name of the island to the city. This island was ceded to the United States after the war with Spain. Today it is the only territory under the Stars and Stripes where Columbus ever set foot. And here's the famous old Morro Fortress, begun by Ponce de Leon in 1533, long before the first settlers came to Jamestown. In this busy harbor, under the shadow of the ancient sea walls, we change planes and speed on with the mail to South America. Scarcely 30 minutes from San Juan, and we're over St. Thomas, capital of the Virgin Islands. Then Saba Island, a Dutch colony without a harbor, where Dutch sea captains come to live when they retire from the sea. Boats must anchor far out in the open roadstead, and all supplies are brought ashore in this fashion. But this is not the hardest part. When they're safe ashore, they must be carried 800 feet up the side of this peak and thence into the town of Bottom, so called because it rests on the bed of an extinct volcano. We refuel in St. John's, Antigua, seat of the government of the British Leeward Islands, where Admiral Nelson fitted out his fleet for the Battle of Trafalgar. Then on past Mont Pelée, whose eruption in 1902 buried the city of Saint-Pierre and its 30,000 people beneath this river of lava. Shortly the island of Trinidad appears, along the base of which spreads Port of Spain, eastern crossroads of the New World, with the headlands of the South American continent looming across the channel. Port of Spain, one of the world's most cosmopolitan cities. Since Sir Walter Raleigh first sailed into this harbor centuries ago, people from all the world have come to Port of Spain, but the city still maintains a dominant British atmosphere. On the streets you may see almost every race on earth. Here are two Hindu high priests. And Saturday night holds the same terrors as it does everywhere else in the world. Trinidad is particularly famous for its great pitch lake, from which has come the asphalt for city streets in almost every corner of the globe. Pitch has been dug from this lake for centuries. Even so, it has hardly changed an inch in depth. But of all the treasures the Spaniards found, the real wealth of the West Indies is sugar. At the time of our Revolutionary War, in terms of world trade, these islands were far more valuable to England than were her colonies in North America. From Cuba south, this product is an important one on every island, and the most modern means of cultivation vie with the most primitive methods, which have not changed in centuries. Men, oxen, horses, steam locomotives of ancient vintage, all compete in transporting the cane to the grinding mills. Ancient windmills, this one erected in 1743, still transform the cane into syrup and sugar and rum to be sold in the markets of the world. This 2-century-old press is made almost entirely of wood. And here's a guaranteed way to keep the kids out of trouble. Just give them a field of sugarcane. Here, as elsewhere over the old Spanish Main, is one of those thrilling contrasts. This and the air mail. From the northern tip of South America, just 2 days from Florida, we race on along the western rim of the Atlantic toward the equator. Here are broad stretches of the New World which, before the coming of the airplane, comparatively few people of the world had ever seen. Southward from the delta of the great Orinoco River lie the Guianas, the only European colonies on the South American continent. Here is Georgetown, capital of the colony of British Guiana. Over routes unmapped before the coming of the airplane, our airliner flies its sure, swift course. Beyond the border of British Guiana, the flat rice fields and canals of Dutch Guiana slip beneath our plane. Here is the quaint city of Paramaribo, capital of Dutch Guiana, straggling around the bend of the racing jungle river Suriname. Here is Government House, where the Dutch governors have lived for more than 100 years, with a statue of Queen Wilhelmina standing in the front yard. Paramaribo is like a bit of the mother country with its spotless streets and glistening houses. Here, as in Trinidad, are many different races. Beside the Dutch colonists and the native Indians are great numbers of Javanese, imported from the Far East as laborers. They have few traffic troubles in the capital of Dutch Guiana. The plump ladies of Paramaribo wear the historic costumes of Old Holland. Only a few minutes from the main streets of the city lies the jungle and another world. Here is one of the world's highest waterfalls, many times the height of Niagara, discovered only 60 years ago. And even today they have been looked upon by very few white men. The primitive natives, for fear of being swept away by the grandeur of these falls, blind themselves before passing by. And here in the interior of Dutch Guiana, just 45 hours from Broadway as the airmail flies, is the land of the bush Negro, former slaves of the Dutch colonists who escaped into the jungle more than 200 years ago. The men folks of the village spend hours over this put-and-take game. They make their own sugar and squeeze the juice from the wild cane by means of this wooden press. And this is the way bread is made, from the cassava root. Baked on an iron plate, it's set out in the sunshine to dry. And then it may be either eaten or worn as a sunshade. With remarkable artistry, the bush Negro carves his implements, his tableware, out of wood. But they're still confronted with a universal problem, the harmonizing of babies and baths. Out of the jungle come innumerable species of hardwood. It is heartbreaking work getting these great logs to the river. Since they're too heavy to float, they're placed aboard rafts and ferried down to the seaport. It requires many hours to fell one of these jungle giants. In the more open spaces, water buffalo are used to drag the trimmed logs through the forest. Fleets of these dugout canoes, manned by the best of the jungle oarsmen, preserve communication with the capital, from which the airmail preserves contact with the world. Without the slightest fear, they guide their fragile craft into the turbulent rapids. For miles and miles, this exciting race goes on. Nature has fitted them for the mastery of these treacherous water routes, over which civilization is slowly moving into the heart of the jungle. Over these highways of the sky with mail, express, and passengers. Down the 7,500-mile western rim of the Atlantic, giant flying clipper ships speed to the equator and beyond, from the Northern Star to the Southern Cross, down the West Indies, over the Guianas to Brazil. Here is the gateway to the Amazon, the widest river in the world, and the city of Belém, Pará. Below is an airmail base on the very edge of the equator. Speeding along the sky routes from far off North America, we have spanned the entire arc of the West Indies and crossed the three Guianas. In the early afternoon of the third day from Miami, we glide to a landing on one of the tributaries of the mighty Amazon. Once the rubber capital of the world, Belém, Pará basks in the glory of a glamorous past. Today it is famed as the connecting link of the airmail routes between North and South America, where mail, passengers, and cargo change planes. On with the striking panorama of Brazil's vast east coast below us, impenetrable jungle and meandering river. Wide deserts of glistening sand, with only the camels lacking to make it a real Sahara. Here are quaint fish traps built into the shallow ocean. In and out of a dozen ports along Brazil's busy coast, this is how a landing would really look from the outside. Like a good pilot, keep your eye on the horizon. See if you can tell when we hit the water. Watch carefully. There, you missed it. Like big quills when furled, these odd sails are numerous along the coasts of northern Brazil. They power fishing boats which sail far out into the Atlantic Ocean. The ancient marches side by side with the modern. Here a community fishing net which stretches for more than a mile, and all the neighborhood turns out to man it. For many hours to haul in their catch. It is a full day's work to manage this one net. When finally it's on shore, the workers divide the catch and the families feast. Ever southward over constantly changing countryside, we speed on to Sal Salvador, capital of the state of Bahia, the oldest center of European civilization in Brazil and one of its most interesting cities. This was an important port even before the English established colonies along our own Atlantic coast. In its streets today are many suggestions of a fascinating history that tells of 29 pirates hanged in one day, of how the Portuguese court fled to this city in 1807, of how part of our own Civil War was fought here between Confederate and Union gunboats over supplies of arms and ammunition. It is known as the City of Churches. You may go to a different church every day in the year and still have several left over. The city has a real uptown and downtown with an elevator running between the two. A new industry along these ancient trade routes is the air service. Great aerodromes in which well-trained staffs of mechanics and engineers take meticulous care of every detail of the airline. This gives some impression of the vast organization behind an airmail service. From the historic state of Bahia, we wing on south. Just 4 days from the Florida coast, our great airliner thunders over the bay 1,000 miles from North America. And the famous Sugarloaf, rising out of the magnificent harbor, bids us welcome to the metropolis of Brazil.
The airplane flies over oceans and spans continents. It has conquered distances and made the people of all the world next-door neighbors. But nothing in the history of aeronautics is more fascinating than the conquest of the Andes, America's highest mountains. Only a few years ago, it was an adventure to cross the rugged masses of Earth which made two separate worlds of the Eastern and Pacific republics of South America. But today, one of these luxurious airliners makes the trip from the capital of Chile to Mendoza, Argentina in exactly 1 hour and 5 minutes. An hour and 5 minute unforgettable scenes. First, the thriving metropolis of Santiago, around which is gathered so much of the tradition and romance of the southern continent. Here on the banks of the Mapocho River, where Pedro de Valdivia paused in his march southward 4 centuries ago, stands a progressive world city, a city of picturesque parks, palaces, and ultra-modern skyscrapers. Just as the historic hill Cerro San Cristobal slips beneath our wings, the mighty mountains loom before us, their fantastic peaks sprinkled with snow, while the radio operator keeps in constant touch with the weatherman on the ground. Up, 10,000, 12,000, 14,000 feet, the great plain climbs with all the grace and ease of the ancient condor, the giant bird which once made its home in these dizzy heights, the Andes among the wonders of the world. The irresistible force of these monarchs of the earth have determined the ethnological, the economic, the cultural developments of a vast continent. Here in the spacious cabin of our plane, with all the comforts and conveniences of a Pullman car and the vigilant services of the purser, we have nothing to do but enjoy this stupendous spectacle beneath us. Although we're 2.5 miles high, there's heat to protect us from the cold of this upper world. Oxygen tubes are handy, but we have no need for them. And there are no uncertainties in the cockpit either, for the pilot has been told just what to expect ahead. From a weather station here in the very heart of the peaks, scientific observers report conditions every few minutes. As we approach, they release a balloon to determine the exact velocity of the wind. Science and religion side by side. Here in this remote valley, his arms outstretched in blessing to us and to all travelers, stands the Christ of the Andes, the monument set up on the borderline between Chile and Argentina, a symbol pledging eternal peace between two great nations. At times, as we slide through these great passes, the plane seems suspended in midair, and the mountains appear close enough to touch. But our speed is nearly 3 miles a minute, and the mountains are miles away. And here is the queen of all American peaks, Mount Aconcagua, rising bleak and forbidding 23,098 feet above the continent. Through this majestic world in 1817, the immortal San Martin, the George Washington of Argentina, led his weary but determined soldiers to join with Chileans and other patriots and drive the representatives of the Spanish king from the New World forever. On foot and on muleback, they climbed these craggy wastes, spurred on by an unfaltering faith and courage. They toiled and suffered. Theirs were the uncharted mountain passes, but ours is the open sky. It took them days to completely make it in 65 minutes. 2,000 times the pilots and radio operators of the Pan American Grace Airways have made this crossing. Conquistadores they, just like the soldiers who dominated the same scene more than 100 years before. So far, we have spanned but a part of this vast network of airlines which extends 4,552 miles from Cristobal to Buenos Aires and Montevideo, from the Panama Canal to the great cities of the Rio de la Plata. We have done only 175 miles so far, but this 175 miles has given us a magnificent opportunity to experience all the progress and all the rugged beauty and glamour which man and nature have to offer in far South America. The fertile valleys of Chile, their green fields and their great city, the deep canyons and glorious peaks of the New World's loftiest mountains, and finally the progressive city of Mendoza, nestling among the vineyards of the Argentine wine country. Mendoza, the western outpost of the Pampa, which stretches away 600 miles to the Atlantic, and to Buenos Aires, the Paris of the Western Hemisphere. And we too have shared in the conquest of the Andes,